Okay, so let us start with wrapper class. Let us start with wrapper class. Now, what is the function of wrapper class? Basically, Java is an object-oriented programming language. So, when we have learned int I, when you have used int I, there is a class also called integer. There is a class called integer. Now this class integer, using this class integer, you can also create integer type of values, but then the values will become object of the class integer. And how would you declare that? Integer I is equals to new integer, and within bracket you can send the value that you want the integer I to have. So every primitive type, this int, char, float, double, these are all primitive types in Java. These are all primitive types in Java. Short, byte, boolean, and with respect to all these primitive types, you also get their corresponding wrapper classes. For int primitive type, the wrapper class is integer. For char primitive type, the wrapper class is character. Please mind the capital letters that they start with. With respect to byte, the primitive type is byte. With respect to float, the primitive type is float. With the primitive type float, the wrapper class is float in capital. With primitive type short, the wrapper class is short. With boolean, the wrapper class is boolean. And with double, the wrapper class is double. Now, this wrapper classes, along with storing the values of the primitive types, they also give you several inbuilt functions which can be used to explicitly convert from one form to another. So, when you are having primitive types, those are not objects. But when you are using wrapper classes to store any value, you are using the objects of the corresponding wrapper class to create and store the value. Now, you can convert. It is possible to convert from primitive type to wrapper class object and vice versa. If you are converting from primitive type to wrapper class type implicitly, then it will be called autoboxing. If you are converting from wrapper class type to primitive type implicitly, then it will be called unboxing. So again, if you convert from primitive to wrapper class type implicitly, then it will be called then it will be called Autoboxing. If you are converting wrapper class to primitive type implicitly, then that is unboxing. Now you can convert from one form to another, that is primitive to wrapper class and wrapper class to primitive, explicitly as well. So let us first see an example of it. Now we can look at this example where we have declared an integer value a as 20. Now in the next line it is written integer in capital letter I is equals to integer dot value of a. Now as we are learning wrapper class, this integer is the wrapper class of the int type. We are declaring a reference or instance of the integer type or integer wrapper class I, and this value of is an inbuilt function that you get in the integer wrapper class. When you write integer dot value of a, then this primitive type a, which holds the value 20, gets automatically converted into an object of the integer type. And this is called explicit conversion, and this is not autoboxing. Autoboxing is the example that is given in the next line, where you just create a reference or instance of integer wrapper class and you write equal to a. You do not use the function value of. So this value of function is internally done by the Java compiler. So this automatic conversion of primitive type A to object type is called autoboxing. Now let us look at this section of the code. Now this section of the code explains to you the unboxing scenario. Now over here we have declared an integer object. This is wrapper class of integer and we are declaring an integer object, and we have passed 3 as the value to the integer constructor. Now over here we have declared a primitive type I, primitive integer I, and we have written a dot int value to convert from integer wrapper class to integer primitive type. Now again, this int value is an inbuilt function that comes with the integer wrapper class object. But this is not unboxing. Unboxing is when the same work is done implicitly. When you write primitive type int j is equals to a, that is the object that we have already declared over here, this automatically gets converted from the wrapper class object to the primitive type. So this is called implicit conversion from from wrapper class to primitive type, and that is called unboxing. Now apart from autoboxing, unboxing, converting from primitive to wrapper class and from wrapper class to primitive, there are other functions that we find with the wrapper class. For example, in this if we write integer k is equals to integer dot value of, and within bracket we give a string but a number string, then also the object k, integer object k, gets created. So this value of over here, this is a static function of the wrapper class, and you can pass string and as well as primitive type, both are allowed. Now you get several other functions in this wrapper class as well. For example, if we write int I, or int, let us give it some other name, int r is equals to integer dot parse int within bracket 10, then this string value that contains a number 10 gets automatically converted to the primitive type integer r. Now, when we can convert a string to integer, it is also possible to convert an integer to string. And how can we do that? Suppose over here we have this integer I, this object I, which contains the value of a. Now suppose we want to create a string over here of this particular integer type. So what can we write? We can write string s is equal to I, that is the name of this object, dot to string, open bracket, close bracket. So this toString method converts this integer I to the string s. Now, one thing we have to be very careful about, if in this value of method, this string that you have passed, in this value of method where you have passed a string, if the string is not a valid number, then you will get an exception. If string is not a valid number, then you get an exception, right? Same thing goes over here. If in the case of parse int over here, the string that we have given, if the string is not a valid number, again you will get an exception over here. And what would be that exception be? The exception would be number format exception that will be thrown, right? So now there are several other functions that we get in wrapper class, and those functions I will explain to you using a practical example.